Guess who's back? Back again. Harry's back. Tell Hagrid. It's been years! Not really, it's only been a little over 1 year, but it might as well been years! I promise you I didn't mean to be a tease. I wasn't trying to yank your tails. I had plans. I had a dream. I had the idea of a future skit for the conclusion of the series, but after the major change in the channel, those ideas are dropped now. So I'm on a new mission to tie my loose ends with most of the YA series I started, beginning with the one that introduced my comparison journey so long ago. We only have 2 books and 3 movies left, all of which I don't remember diddly squat about. That's not true. Of course, I remember the main stuff, but the itty bitty gray details draw a blank, especially with the Half-Blood Prince. I'm sure I mentioned this before, but I lived on those ABC Family Potter marathons that played every other weekend.
Our Harry Potter 5-day weekend event begins Wednesday at 7:30 only on ABC Family.
At the time, they only made it to Order of the Phoenix, so with those first 5 movies, I know by heart. I've seen Expecto Patronum cast a million times, and Cedric's dad still rings in my ear with his gut-wrenching, "That's my son! That's my boy!" Oh, it kills me every time. But by the time the Half-Blood Prince came out, my Harry Potter phase was pretty much over, and I just watched the rest of the movies when they came out of theaters, mainly because of the hype and just to have a conclusion. This movie came out in 2009. Almost a decade since watching it again. Before I even started working on this review, I took a moment to write down what I actually did remember, and this is what I came up with. Dumbledore, all caps, drinking in cave, Malfoy stalking. I remember there was a lot of stalking on Harry's part, and that was it. So here I am, experiencing the conclusion for the first time again, but now through the book's narrative. For the longest time, I deemed this story my least favorite based on how little I remembered it. It could be just a movie, but today's the day I truly figure out the quality of this story. Because I've heard and read that it is most people's favorite and also the weakest in the series. So which one is it? On the rise or on the decline? No better way than to just jump into it and figure it out myself. If you're of age, you can apparate. If not, get your flu powder ready and join me by this cozy fire because we have a lot to discuss. Half-Blood Prince is by far the most unsettling book in the series. Every year you kinda expect the same routine with new teachers, new spells, and wacky adventures with the trio trying to solve their yearly mystery. They've gone through magical trials, fought an underground snake, tangled with werewolves and dementors, participated in a school tournament, even raised an army under the nose of the ministry. But this year? Almost everything is done in secrecy. The shift in tone has drastically changed now that Voldemort and his Death Eaters are causing mayhem in both the wizard and muggle worlds. Ministry officials and characters we met in the past are disappearing and killed off. Extra precautions have been established against the dark forces in case you or a family member come across a Death Eater, traces of a Death Eater, or a Death Eater disguising themselves with a Polyjuice potion. That bright and cheery atmosphere you associated with this story is pretty much extinguished. Even when you have characters like Ron trying to look past the gloom and purpose for these new layers of protection, it's not the same as it once was. And this is one of the main key differences between the book and film I picked up on that I'm surprised not a lot of reviewers go in depth about. The security. It was heavily implemented around Harry since he's now being considered the chosen one, and that title kept the Weasley house guarded by Aurors, and his own butt saved a few times snooping on Malfoy. Hogwarts is protected with an enchanted barrier to prevent any intruders from apparating within, with Filch being upgraded to a TSA position and more Aurors placed in every corner. Yet, terrible accidents continue to happen, luckily on Harry's watch. Kids are being cursed by mysterious packages, poisoned by mead, all targeted towards one sugar-loving man, Dumbledore. But this story doesn't attempt to make that a surprise. The book and movie explore a scene called Spinner's End, involving a secret conversation between Bellatrix, Malfoy's mom Narcissa, and Snape. I prefer the movie's vagueness since I thought the book was giving away a bit too much, but nonetheless, it's no mystery that Voldemort gave Draco an important task involving Dumbledore, and the scenes that follow already put him on the prime suspect list. We know who's responsible, and we also know to some degree why. We just don't know what. Harry first catches Draco sneaking around Diagon Alley visiting Borgin and Burkes and decides to eavesdrop on the conversation, beginning this obsession over the deed that must be done. Upon Dumbledore's instructions, Harry keeps his invisible cloak on him at all times, allowing him to sneak around and do his snooping in peace. The Marauders map is back again, used to track Malfoy's movements, and Crabbe and Goyle, who are standing guard by the room of requirement, disguised as girls with the Polyjuice potion. And this was the first time Harry was right about his suspicions. With almost every incident, he blamed Draco without much evidence to prove it. We know that it's highly possible, but for Harry, no one truly believed him aside from his friends. He tried telling Mr. Weasley to investigate further, but found nothing. He even told Dumbledore, who really brushed it aside, but not because he didn't believe Harry. Quite the opposite, actually. For Draco's own safety, Dumbledore played dumb until the climax when it was just them and the paralyzed Harry in the astronomy tower. Draco goes over his tricks with the help of Rose Murdoch from the Three Broomsticks, who was under the Imperial curse and obeyed his bidding. She put Katie Bell under the curse to deliver the package to Dumbledore when they were finally able to visit Hogsmeade, and she poisoned a bottle of mead given to the new potions teacher Slughorn so it could be shared with Dumbledore. And since Filch is a squib who can't distinguish potions and poison, it was very easy to sneak in. All of this was done with precise stealth and secrecy, dodging all the Aurors and beefed up security, something that the movie should have emphasized more. I didn't get the same feel of protection that the book gave me. There were more limitations to their movement, giving a legitimate reason for the lack of activity that goes on this year. The movie, for the most part, feels like nothing's changed at all. I'll admit that there are some impressive cinematic shots demonstrating the grim state of things, but then there are situations that I can't ignore the fact that, by this point, they just can't go about their days like the previous years. Instead of starting off in Pivot Drive with his aunts, Harry is apparently living on his own, open to any attack or meet up with the Death Eaters. When Harry was given the boot by Draco and left on the train, it was actually Tonks who found him since she noticed Harry didn't get off. Instead, it's Luna, who just happens to be wandering around the train. The Weasley house is also supposed to be protected, and yet they throw in this scene, which I learned is complete filler for the movie. At first, I thought this was part of the Deathly Hallows because burning down the burrow seems like a pretty significant event, but that wasn't the case. Maybe they didn't have the actor for Rufus Grimjar yet, but I'm sure an intense Christmas dinner with Percy Weasley would have been better than just adding your own stuff. Like, why were Bellatrix and Greyback here in the first place? To kill Harry? He's off limits, only to Voldemort. There was no purpose or plan to their visit other than to entice some action, because this story isn't that big on the action scenes. The incidents are very subtle and play like a horror film. But the part that really screamed lack of security was the ending. While Harry and Dumbledore step away from the castle, Malfoy begins the plan he's been working on the entire year. Within the room of requirement was a broken vanishing cabinet he was fixing up so the one in Borgin and Burkes could be used to transport some Death Eaters into the school. In the book, there's this whole battle with the Aurors and the intruders while Malfoy deals with Dumbledore at the top of the tower. But with the movie, no such battle occurs. The Death Eaters just storm into the castle, do the deed, and then roll out, with one Auror as guard. It was said that this short battle was cut out because it was too similar to the battle in Deathly Hallows, but you could have given some kind of struggle? I mean, one guard? You really wanted this to feel like the biggest L Hogwarts ever took. I'll give you that. But if you're already adding pointless filler scenes, might as well go all out and give a bit of a fight. That's just me. But the main point I'm trying to make is that with the knowledge of security in this story's environment, it makes sense why some things were suppressed and there was a huge focus on the school year. Speaking of which... I'm not gonna lie, I thought this story read like fanfiction. Maybe a fourth of it, but am I wrong? There wasn't much outside the Voldemort and Half-Blood Prince stuff aside from character development, which is what most of this book really is. It's more accurate to say that if you've grown a strong attachment with these characters, then you'll probably like this year. It honestly feels as YA as it could be. Harry's now captain of the Quidditch team, having to deal with self-conscious friends, jealousy, and players that just really grind his gears. Not to mention trying to keep him together without Draco's assassin attempts knocking him out left and right. The Quidditch segments are less focused in the movie, only showing a glimpse to advance Ron's romance, but for the glimpse it did show, It was tight. I actually wish there was more of it. Maybe Harry showing off his captain skills and Luna being the new commentator now that Lee Jordan has graduated. That was definitely a missed opportunity. Luna Lovegood on the commentator seat is exactly how it sounds. She's making personal remarks on players, getting their names wrong, and spaces out to talk about the clouds instead of the plays being made. It's so her, and I love it. Harry is now a Newt student and has a lot more time on his hands for their more advanced classes dedicated to their dream professions. I don't remember if the movies established this before, but Harry had his eyes on becoming an Auror since Goblet of Fire. The only problem was that when his owls came back, he didn't reach the required grade in Snape's potions class, so his chances of being an Auror were squandered, or so we thought. Just before the school year started, he joined Dumbledore to bring a teacher out of retirement since the last one was carried away by centaurs. Horace Slughorn, the previous head of Slytherin House, and definite proof that not all Slytherin are evil. In fact, his personality comes across as jovial and charismatic and takes a fancy to people who are on the promising road to success. It's no surprise that he took a liking to Harry, the chosen one, son to one of his favorite students, Lily. There's so many prodigy vibes that there's no question Harry was going to become an honorary member of the Slug Club, including Hermione and even Ginny. His addition to the faculty becomes clutch as Harry believes that Slughorn was being given the dark arts position when it was really potions he was brought back for, and Snape finally got his year with the dark arts, to Harry's huge disappointment. But on the bright side, the requirement for potions was lowered and Harry can now take his potions class without Snape's presence, which would be preferred since their occlumency lessons in the previous film didn't go so well. Again, aside from the scenes that advance the plot, there's not much importance to the classes, which is best because this is the year that they learn about using non-verbal spells. Following this trend of stealth and secrecy, Snape tries to teach them about casting spells from their minds, catching their enemies off guard with the element surprise. It requires a lot of concentration and mind to control, and it was something Harry struggled to learn, especially when it really mattered. But supposedly, the movie had already made pros out of our heroes with this technique, as these many examples show, so bringing it up now would raise so many questions. The only new skill that kinda remains unique to the story is apparition, which for wizards seems like the equivalent of getting your driver's license. There are common courtesy rules such as not apparating into someone's house unannounced and being able to use it when you're of age. It was the year Harry and his friends were beginning to learn how to apparate, since it also required a lot of practice to avoid simple mistakes like splinching, the separation of random body parts. There's not much to say about apparition in the movie except when Dumbledore uses it within the castle. Hogwarts is strictly protected against apparators coming in, which explains why Malfoy needed the Vanishing Cabinet to bring in the Death Eaters. Dumbledore from the book respected this and made sure to walk as far as Hogsmeade. But once Harry joins Dumbledore at the tower, they just apparate out of the joint to the cave, and all I could think of is, if he's able to apparate out, then surely anyone could apparate in, and there was really no need for the Vanishing Cabinet. But that's such a nitpick in comparison to what the movie actually decides to focus heavily on, being a rom-com. If the tone of the book settled on creating this atmosphere of uneasy danger, then the movie sits on the opposite spectrum with more attention on the lighter side of the story. I'm not saying that this movie is always bright. I just don't think that it did a good job blending the tones together. Even going about their day, the trio were always on top of the news. Remember Stan Shumpike, conductor of the night bus way back in Prisoner of Azkaban? Well, there was news about him being in Azkaban for saying he had an inside knowledge on the Death Eaters after a night out with his boys in the pub. Stupid on his part, but when the interrogation pretty much said that this guy was full of it, the Ministry still kept him in Azkaban for the sake of increasing the public's faith that they still knew what the hell they were doing. It was little details like that that showed the balance of still enjoying your life, but also remaining cautious to the current reality. I didn't get the same feeling here. All I got was a lot of goofing out and love. Lots of love. So much love that even Dumbledore couldn't help but be roped into these teenage affairs.
Fear I may have stolen a wondrous night from you, Harry. She was, truthfully, very pretty. The girl.
What about your activities outside the classroom?
Sir?
Well, I notice you spend a great deal of time with Miss Granger. I can't help wondering...
Oh, no. I mean, she's brilliant, and we're friends. But no.
Forgive me. I was merely being curious.
Most of the couples that were present in the book didn't make the cut, but I think that's best since they didn't have much involvement with the initial plot. Bill Weasley and Fleur Delacour were together at the time, and none of the females were particularly fond of her. Ginny, for one, kept calling her Flem throughout most of the book. But it wasn't until Bill was scarred by Greyback during the absent astronomy tower battle that Fleur proved she wasn't as superficial as they thought. And that little moment helped push Tonks and Lupin's relationship forward as well. In the movie, it's clear that the depressed Tonks and reluctant Lupin were skipped over and jumped straight into their shipment. But I think that in an alternative version, it would have been cool to see both of them working as guards at Hogwarts and seeing their relationship just blossom from there. But this is YA, so the love lives of our heroes were top priority, and it is way more present here than in any other story. Girls and their obsession with love potions, boys and their appetite for love-infused chocolate. That's about as magical as it gets for wizards. It then becomes more like the generic teenage romance you read or watch on TV, especially with Ron and Hermione. I really thought this would be the one where they end up together, but of course, Ron's an idiot and a jackass. With Ginny now dating Dean Thomas and hearing from her that Hermione had a snogging session with Victor Crumb, with the addition of his best friend and Cho Chang, Ron becomes more insecure since he's the only one who has yet to get some. This interrupts his focus for the first Quidditch match, which Harry can't have because he's dealing with so many other things, so he hatches a plan with the potion he won on the first day of Slughorn's class, Felix Felicis, or as I like to know it as, the Fix-It Felix potion. Harry makes Ron think he's been given a bit of liquid luck before the match, and that confidence translated into them winning the game. And Ron was high in his own energy that he chose the first girl to snog that came his way, Lavender Brown. Her movie counterpart was perfectly casted to be the right amount of obsessed. Their relationship had no substance other than kissing, and it became one-sided real fast. At first, her little 1-1 was just trying to make Hermione jealous, but after a while, he was starting to see that all this love and attention was being a bit too much. No lie, there's a scene in the book where they just meet up and kiss, like not even a high or anything. Just take a look at this sentence. There was a noise like a plunger being withdrawn from a block sink, and Ron resurfaced. This is pretty much how it goes for them until Ron is poisoned and sent to the nurse, slipping up and whispering Hermione's name unconsciously. She's been pretty upset for the way he's been acting, but she's always been the one to forgive easily. But they better be together by the end of this. He already missed so many obvious flags.
You can't be serious.
That happens to be my sister.
So? If she looked over here and saw you snogging me, would you expect her to get up and leave?
But let's talk about Harry. A complete stud magnet with people calling him the chosen one. There's even this one girl, Romilda Vane, who tried to snatch him via chocolate infused with a love potion. I mean, everyone's got an eye for Harry now, but Harry's only got eyes for one girl. This random waitress at a cafe.
Hey, I was wondering...
11. That's when I get off. You can tell me all about that toss of Harry Potter.
What was up with that? Okay, let me start by saying that while I don't have a problem with Harry and Ginny, I do think that up to this point, his feelings came out of nowhere. I never questioned Ginny's crush on Harry. That always seemed to be apparent throughout the series. But Harry being this crazy for Ginny all of a sudden seemed forced. He's incredibly jealous of her dating Dean Thomas, can't stop dreaming about her, and really feels awkward talking about it with Ron, hoping not to drive a wedge in their friendship.
So what is it he sees in her?
I don't know. She's smart, funny, attractive.
Attractive?
You know, she's got nice skin.
Skin?
Sure, there's an explanation there saying how they've known each other for years, but I mean his obsession with Malfoy felt a lot more natural. Hell, his obsession with the Half-Blood Prince was more believable, but that's whatever. She was already digging him from the start, so there wasn't much question if they will hook up or not. Though with the movie's version of Ginny, it's a completely different character. The book paints her as this feisty redhead who's just fun to be around and acts like one of the guys. She's an incredible Quidditch player, carries a bunch of sass, and isn't afraid to speak her mind at all. Honestly, whenever she pops up in the scene, I don't suppress a laugh. She's pretty entertaining. Yet the movie keeps her pretty tame and honestly a little bland. It also doesn't help that just now she's been included in the gang. Like, she's more present with the trio now than ever before. It only reminds me that the movie characters are only relevant when they need to be. So if they really wanted to make this work, she should have been more integrated a film or two prior. Anyway, that pretty much wraps up the underwhelming side of the story. Now, for the good stuff. I don't don't think I'm wrong saying Dumbledore's lessons were the best part of the story, and it's a crime that there's so little of it in the movie. At the end of the day, this was something to look forward to. Private lessons with the headmaster himself. It's basically criminal psychology, as they use the pensieve to look into several memories Dumbledore gathered together that explore the past and origins of Tom Riddle, aka Voldemort. I wasn't expecting it to be as good as it was, but for someone who's very intrigued with any form of psychology, it was just fun to study these memories and notice certain behaviors and habits that carried on through the years. From ministry officers to house elves, these memories were secured to gain some clue on how to defeat Voldemort. It starts with the origins of his birth. In the House of Gaunt lived the last remaining descendants of Salazar Slytherin. Tom Riddle's mom, Merope, was in love with a muggle, Tom Riddle Sr., who her brother Morphin and dad Marvolo disapproved. So Morphin attacked Riddle, bringing the law enforcement to their home, and the added abuse towards Merope made things worse, eventually leading to Morphin and Marvolo's lockup in Azkaban, allowing Merope to be free of her family. Most of the information is Dumbledore speculation, since there were large timeline gaps between memories, so there was no witness to Merope using the love potion to make Tom Riddle Sr. fall in love with her, long enough to become pregnant with their child. Over time, the guilt must have caught up with her and believed that their love could be real, which wasn't the case. He abandoned her, and she became so heartbroken that she no longer wanted to use magic to her benefit. Desperate for gold, she sold her family locket at Borgin and Burke's, and when the time came, she died at childbirth, leaving her son, Tom Marvolo Riddle, an orphan. The next memory is the first one shown in the movie, but watered down. What I liked about the book's Tom is that he slipped up when first meeting Dumbledore. All those stories about Tom tormenting the other orphans proved to be right by how commanding and full of himself his presence was. He thought Dumbledore was just another doctor until the wardrobe was set in flames, and began to listen carefully as the subject of wizards piqued his interest. The way he talked about his powers prior of learning about his talents showed his sadistic side.
I can make things move without touching them. I can make animals do what I want without training them. I can make bad things happen to people who are mean to me. I can make them hurt. If I want.
The movie doesn't dissect the conversations to its full extent, and while most of it isn't necessarily important to the plot, it's just a rare opportunity to see what Voldemort was like as a child. He has a superiority complex. When you compare the news of being a wizard between these two orphans, one takes it with full disbelief, while the other simply accepts it, as if he always knew this was part of his destiny towards greatness. He's self-sufficient enough to explore Diagon Alley on his own without the help of Dumbledore, and when he heard that the barman who stands between the Muggle world and Diagon Alley is also named Tom, he gives this look of contempt because he hates being tied to things that make him remotely ordinary, and he loved to collect things. The box of trinkets were from the kids he hurt and tormented, a reminder of what cruel magic he had to perform to get them. All of this was more than enough evidence to prove this kid's dangerous, and made the mistake of showing Dumbledore this side of him. From then on, he never slipped up again and attended Hogwarts like a changed man. He was always at the top of his class, gaining popularity with his peers and teachers. One thing Dumbledore made clear is that Tom never had friends. He didn't need friends, but followers. To people he attracted were ones looking for attention, glory, and admired a guy who could invent new levels of cruelty and chaos. During this time, Tom essentially created the first group of Death Eaters, causing incidents that can never be linked back to them, such as the case with the Chamber of Secrets and Hagrid being blamed for it. Through investigation, Dumbledore also learned about Tom's obsession to learn about his parentage. He tried looking up his father through all the wizard records, but had to face the fact that he never once set foot in the Hogwarts. So we started looking into his mother's side and learned about the Slytherin legacy. The next memory was of his uncle Morphin, who he tracked down one summer. They both were able to communicate through parcel tongue, proving their connection to one another, and Morphin begins to complain about his dishonorable sister marrying the muggle filth that lived down the street. And that's all Tom needed to hear before the memory cuts off. From what Dumbledore gathered, Morphin was stupefied, and Tom took his wand to eliminate his father and the remaining Riddle bloodline. He then reshaped his uncle's memories to frame him for the murder and stole the family ring. Tom escaped without a trace of his actions, and Morphin spent the rest of his life in Azkaban, confessing to the murder of Tom Riddle Sr. From there, we look at the next important memory that the movie covered, and it's pretty accurate. Back to a time when Tom confronted a much younger Slughorn asking about these things called Horcruxes. Slughorn claims to have never heard of them, but the memory had traces of being tampered with, showing that Slughorn painted himself in the holy light to hide the real conversation. This was the reason Dumbledore pulled Slughorn out of retirement and believed that Harry had a better chance of getting the true memory out of him Yet, with all the advanced classes and Quidditch and directing most of his attention towards Malfoy, Harry never finds the time, and his actual first attempt was so half-assed, I couldn't believe it. He just takes the direct approach and asks, which spooks Slughorn and causes him to avoid Harry. Which is funny because before Slughorn became incredibly important to the plot, Harry was doing all he could to stay away from his advances to be collected into his little slug club. But just when it began to matter, Harry squandered his chance and pretty much stopped trying. He had another chance when Ron ate the enchanted chocolate, but things turned sour when Ron got poisoned. It was actually frustrating because of how realistic it was for his character. Harry's pretty much the same as Ron when it comes to classes and finding the easiest solution. Cheating with the Half-Blood Prince is proof of that. But I would have thought that he would have tried harder for Dumbledore, of all people, and the quiet cold scolding he's given is well deserved. Dumbledore asked Harry if he did all he could, if he explored every single trick and idea his mind could think of to collect that memory. Dumbledore is doing all he can to make sure Harry is prepared for what's coming, and just to see Harry begin to understand the weight of his situation makes this small scene a strong development for his character. So after Harry promises to try harder from now on, they begin to dive into Tom's future after Hogwarts. Being such a promising student, everyone believed that Tom could work anywhere and do anything, even become the Minister of Magic one day. So no one was ready to see this prodigy work as an appraiser at Borgin and Burke's. He did try to secure a position at Hogwarts as a new Defense Against Dark Arts teacher, but the headmaster at the time, Professor Dippet, denied him the job because he was too young. So he settled for hunting rare and valuable items. The next memory was from a house elf named Hoki, and the time Tom visited her master, Hepzibah Smith, who was the proud owner of a goblet from Helga Hufflepuff and the Slytherin locket his mother pawned off so many years ago. 2 days after that meeting, Hoki was blamed for the murder of her master, the two priceless items were stolen, and Tom quit his job and disappeared from the world, never resurfacing again until much later in Dumbledore's office. The final memory shows the younger Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts, and the sickly looking Voldemort, discussing once again about the dark arts position. But unlike Dippet, Dumbledore knew Tom. He knew him well enough to understand Tom never cared for the job but to raise an army from within with young, impressionable wizards. I also like how there's a strain in Dumbledore's words near the end of this conversation. The way that he says he wished he could have changed Tom says more than enough how sad he felt about the outcome of his future. But the craziest thing about this memory is that it basically confirms that this job was cursed. Since Tom was denied, no other teacher lasted more than a year. I always thought that was a joke. You know, like, oh, haha, who's the next crazy challenger to take the job and what will cause him to quit? Are you meaning to tell me it was literally cursed? Since Voldemort couldn't have the job, no one can? That blew my mind. So now Dumbledore has shared all his memories with Harry, leaving just Slughorns to be decrypted, which is done with a little luck. Harry drinking the Fix-It-Felix potion is my favorite chapter and scene from the story. Having no idea what will happen under the influence of the potion, the outcome just paints him in a completely different light, especially Daniel Radcliffe. It looked like he was having immense fun being high off his own luck. I also find it funny how the order of events are reversed between the book and film. Harry visiting Hagrid is still the same, and just as funny as you can imagine when he says it, but in the book, he sees Slughorn getting plant leaves from Professor Sprout and invites him to Aragog's funeral, since the venom of those spiders is so rare and Slughorn is looking to collect. Hagrid doesn't mind at all, and while Slughorn does his best to seem concerned, even giving a small eulogy, he collects a vial of venom while Hagrid is in tears. But in the movie, it's the complete opposite. Instead of simply asking for the leaves, Slughorn is being a sneak and trying to cut a few before Harry catches him in the act. And when he's at the funeral during Hagrid's sorrow, he's pretty brave just saying, yo, I'm just here for the venom. Not really criticism or anything, I just thought it was funny how conniving the movie turned him to be. But once the meat is out, Hagrid and Slughorn get mad drunk and Harry uses this time to get the truth. Talking about his mom Lily and how she died to protect him, asking Slughorn to be brave just like her.
Be brave, Professor. Be brave like my mother. Otherwise, you disgrace her.
Slughorn finally caves and gives up the true memory, and Harry rushes back to Dumbledore's office to reveal what's been hidden. In this version, Tom is using charm and flattery to get Slughorn talking about Horcruxes, which describe objects that the person conceals part of their soul in, so if a part of you gets killed, you can still live on with the Horcruxes, making you immortal. Hearing this, Tom couldn't contain his excitement and slipped again, being too interested in the killing process of making a Horcrux, and if anyone's ever attempted to rip their soul into 7 pieces, since 7 is apparently the most powerfully magical number. That was Slughorn's fatal mistake, and the point where the book and movie split on certain knowledge. Since the movie only presented 2 memories with very little analysis, there's basically no lead as to what the other Horcruxes might be. But because the book had time to discuss each and every memory, Dumbledore concluded that Voldemort would make Horcruxes out of the things he collected. But not just anything, things that were worthy of serving his greatness and legacy, like the Slytherin ring or locket. The ring proved it. Throughout this story, Dumbledore's burnt hand is just a mystery until the Horcrux comes into play. This was the result of destroying Marvolo's ring, and if he didn't get to Snape in time to rescue him from a terrible curse, he might have died. We also can't forget Riddle's diary from Chamber of Secrets. The heirs of Slytherin hid within the pages, and Harry's description of this being that could act and think for itself resembled much of a soul living inside that book. There's also Voldemort's resurrected body from the Goblet of Fire. That can now be considered a Horcrux. The Hufflepuff goblet he stole could also be a potential Horcrux based on his significant history, and Dumbledore suggests the snake Nagini, who's always close to Voldemort and never leaves his side.
How would you find them? They could be hidden anywhere, couldn't they?
True.
6. The book established 6 of them, and I'm very curious to relearn how they managed to gather a lead in the next film. One last thing I want to mention about these lessons is that it not only served the purpose of furthering the plot and setting up the final book, but also gives Harry and Dumbledore's relationship the greatest emphasis. Harry has always given Dumbledore his utmost respect, and Dumbledore never talks down to Harry and treats him like a regular adult. They are on the same wavelength in this book, and nothing proves that more than the trip to the cave where Voldemort once tortured 2 orphans as a child. Dumbledore located a possible Horcrux location and invited Harry to join him in retrieving it, as long as he followed his every instruction. The movie did this scene justice with its incredible cinematography, the bleak lighting. It all created a suspenseful setting that didn't distract too much attention away from the performance. Especially when Dumbledore drinks that enchanted water and Harry is asked to continue forcing it down his throat once the effects kick in. Truly a heartbreaking scene.
Stop! It will stop, Professor. It will stop. But only if you keep drinking.
Don't make me.
I'm sorry, sir.
After the locket is secured, Dumbledore asks Harry for water, and Harry, unable to conjure up any, goes to the surrounding lake, being taken by these living zombies called Inferi. Despite the draining task he had to endure, Dumbledore still comes out as the champ and unleashes this powerful fire spell that just drives all the Inferi away, saving himself and Harry. Yet, in the end, it all ends in disappointment for 2 reasons. 1. The locket they found ended up being fake, and the real one was taken by a mysterious person with the initials RAB. And 2, well, I think for dramatic effect, we'll lump this in with our final mystery. Who exactly is this story about? Is it about Voldemort and his origins? Is it about Malfoy and his incredulous task? No. Just as the title suggests, it is about the Half-Blood Prince, who was introduced as the previous owner of Harry's Potions textbook, who knew better techniques than the original instructions offered. Without it, Harry wouldn't have been able to impress Slughorn with a decent looking Draught of Living Death potion and win the Felix Felicis that came in handy to learn about Horcruxes. Without it, Harry wouldn't have learned about Bezoars being the antidote for most potions, and practically saved Ron's life when he drank the poison mead. And the many spells written down were mostly harmless, like the Levicorpus that just hangs people by their feet, the Muffliato charm that fills anyone's ears with this buzzing sound, or the toenail growing hex that just grows toenails super fast. And then there's Sectum Sempra, warned only for enemies. The only time it's used is when Harry follows Malfoy in the bathroom and enters a short duel, with Harry quick on the draw and striking Malfoy in the chest. It makes Harry look like a monster, but to be fair, in the book, Malfoy was a split second away from uttering the Crucio curse before Harry defended himself. Yet, there was no way to tell how severe the damages would be or if the situation really called for this, making the action regrettable. With Malfoy bleeding on the floor, Snape rushes to the scene, splitting the book and movie once more. In the movie, Snape doesn't even say a word and just lets Harry walk away with his guilt, seeing the error of his ways and deciding that the book needed to be gone for good, leading to an intimate scene with him and Ginny. But Snape in the book isn't that lenient. Ever since the Christmas party and Slughorn's boasting, Snape was really curious how Harry got good at potions all of a sudden because, you know, he taught the dope. And now he was even more curious about his knowledge on this dark spell and demanded Harry to bring all of his textbooks for inspection. So Harry hid the Half-Blood Prince in the room of requirement not for his own benefit, but the prince's. With all the help that the prince has done for him, Harry couldn't just betray him over one little mistake, and certainly not give him up to someone like Snape. Their relationship has always sat on polar opposites and took an awful turn after their occlumency lessons in the Order of the Phoenix. Harry would still question his loyalty despite Dumbledore's constant reminders that he trusts Snape with his life, and there's no reason to doubt. But after eavesdropping on Snape and Malfoy after the Christmas party and learning from a drunk Trelawney that Snape overheard the prophecy long ago and reported it back to Voldemort, there's just no way for Harry to keep believing Snape is a good guy. And the matter isn't settled until he and Dumbledore return from the cave. Seeing the Death Mark planet in the sky, Dumbledore and Harry fly up to the astronomy tower where Malfoy was waiting for his moment to kill Dumbledore. At this point, Harry was immobilized by Dumbledore while under the invisibility cloak so he wouldn't be seen. But the movie just has him stay quiet and stand there while... Anyways, while the Death Eaters and Aurors are fighting below, Dumbledore is stalling for time, questioning Malfoy's morality until more Death Eaters come to speed up the job. And when Snape shows up on the scene, Harry has no choice, at least in the book, but to leave Dumbledore, already weakened by the events that transpired in the cave before, in the hands of the man he trusted so deeply. And then, this happens.
Avada Kedavra.
At least in the book, the battle below gave ample time for Snape and Malfoy to get away from the scene while Harry rushed his way to them. Here, it's mainly the shock and plot that lets him get far enough to burn Hagrid's house. But Harry finally makes it and has a short duel with Snape before getting completely wrecked and being left with one final surprise.
You dare use my own spells against me, Potter? Yes. I'm the Half-Blood Prince.
It all came back to me once I remembered who the Half-Blood Prince was. A complete, oh, that's right moment for me. And when I look at the book as a whole with this knowledge, the plot structure this time around was well executed. The Spinner's End chapter was never really about Malfoy's task, but the question on Snape's loyalty. The story only focused on two classes to show the duality of Harry's feelings towards Snape. He hates him, but at the same time appreciates all the indirect help he got from him. This reveal just hits harder in the book because how is he supposed to react? The prince that he's been protecting and obsessing all year long turned out to be the murderer of Harry's greatest friend and confidant? The man who, out of everyone, placed the most trust in Snape? It is the biggest betrayal, and Harry couldn't do anything about it. The Half-Blood Prince taught Harry all these spells, even the dreadful Sectum Sempra, but Harry never got the hang of Snape's teaching on non-verbal spells, so he couldn't be discreet about his attacks, while Snape is just belittling Harry in his lack of training. The Death Eaters managed to get away, letting Hogwarts sit with the biggest L of the night, caused by the ultimate choice from the Half-Blood Prince. Imagine this. On a warm summer day, all the students lined up and marched out the steps of Hogwarts. Hundreds of chairs set up in rows in front of the school lake, seated by an assembly of people and a few familiar faces. The Order, the Ministry, little people like Ernie Prang, journalists like Rita Skeeter, even enemies of the past, all gathered together in front of a marble table with a choir of mer people singing an angelic tune. Hagrid walks down the aisle with a corpse wrapped in purple velvet, spangled with golden stars, settled on the marble table, and a speech given about the deceased's achievements throughout his life. Once all has been said, the body and table burst into white flames, transforming into a white tomb, and a line of centaurs firing arrows into the sky as their final salute. This was Dumbledore's funeral, a book-only exclusive that gave the beloved headmaster a beautiful send-off surrounded by those who admired him and, at the very least, respected him. And while the movie did give Dumbledore some sort of send-off, this comparison between the two should be enough evidence to show what the movie's problem was. I don't think it was a good adaptation. There was an abundance of teenage foolery that greatly overshadowed the more interesting scenes of the story. The Voldemort Half-Blood Prince scenario should have been more prominent and explored, with just a splash of the love stories and the schoolwork being subtle and interwoven. Instead, it was the other way around, so I don't blame anyone calling this film a rom-com. That's just as an adaptation. On its own though, the movie is pretty fun to watch. It took me a while, but after looking over the scenes over and over again during review, I could get behind this movie's color. Hogwarts can get pretty ugly to look at, but it sort of helped immensely with the visual storytelling. When the movie did focus on the Voldemort Half-Blood Prince plot, it did it with artistic direction, and I can't skimp over how beautiful it was done. Most of the transitions were gorgeous, capturing the tragedy of Malfoy's dilemma and Snape's predicament. The movie didn't have to explicitly tell me. The emotions behind the music and camera work conveyed the message clearly. So in those regards, the movie didn't succeed as an adaptation, but it's not that bad of a film itself. As for the book, I severely misjudged it because of how little I remembered the story, and automatically deemed it my least favorite. Now, it might qualify to be in my top 3 of the series. I can see now why people call this one their favorite book. It's the one where everything is finally out of the table and rewarding if you've been following along the journey. It's the one with the biggest death and betrayal. I still stand by about this being the setup for the conclusion, but the execution was excellently crafted with strong character development that pretty much establishes everyone's role. The days of fun are over. We, like the characters, have grown alongside them, anticipating the fateful day when they must clash. Without Dumbledore, Harry only carries with him the knowledge to defeat Voldemort and his reliable friends. They won't be coming back to Hogwarts next year. They will follow and support the Chosen One, taking their first and final step into the Deathly Hallows.